My name is Taylor Gutierrez, and I am a graduate student in the Master of Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies program in the Department of Occupational, Workforce, and Leadership Studies at Texas State University. And my study is the influence of perceived supervisor leadership style on employee efficiency. And I hope you enjoy my presentation. So this research was conducted to determine if there is a type of leader or leadership style that can cultivate maximum efficiency across all employees. And the reason that I was so excited and curious about this topic is based on my personal and professional experience. I had a boss at the beginning of my career who had a very specific leadership style, and when I was promoted and got a new boss with a very different leadership style, I noticed a huge change in how efficient I was at work and how much happier I was. And I feel like that made me more efficient, and I wondered why. Why was I more efficient based on these two different women who were my bosses? And naturally, I went to the literature and tried to figure out what's the link here. And when I couldn't find the exact answer I was looking for, I knew that this had to be my research. I had to do this because I had to know for me, and since there was a gap in the literature, it was perfect. So the purpose was to investigate the relationship between leadership styles of supervisors and employee efficiency in the workplace. And to study this, I came up with these questions, and instead of reading them to you, basically it asks, how does one leader's leadership style influence their employee? And how does another leader's leadership style influence their employee? And how do those employees compare against one another based on their different leaders? So to sort of frame all of this, I used the Bass transformational leadership theory, which basically, in layman's terms, says that good leaders will inspire their followers to change, to be like them, and become good leaders in return. So basically, the ultimate lead by example. And you'll create new leaders who will do the same. And so because of this, I used the leadership styles that he laid out in his research, which are transformational leaders, transactional leaders, and passive avoidant leaders, who are also called and known as laissez-faire leaders. And transformational means that this is a boss that believes in you, that you feel like you can do anything because they have your back, and they'll dream with you, and they will set goals with you. It's very much a partnership. In contrast, transactional is, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. Basically, if you do your job, you'll get paid. But that is not always a great leadership style, because if you make a mistake, you get punished. Whereas a transformational leader will say, all right, let's talk about this. And a passive avoidant or laissez-faire means hands off, is basically just not interested. They want you to do what you're going to do and not really be involved and be in your business, which can be good and bad. So those are just the three that I focused on in my study to give myself a little more of a framework, because I wanted to do a very big kitchen sink style, is there a correlation? Let's find it, instead of getting too narrow and missing it. So I use this as sort of my foundation and, of course, framework. Because leadership style is such a widely studied topic, there is so much research out there about leaders and leadership styles that I needed something to sort of steer my way, and make my path a little straighter. Because employee efficiency basically has little to no research. So I needed something to anchor that. So that is sort of my framework and how I came up with what I needed to do to get results about leadership style and employee efficiency. So when it comes to research design, I created, of course, my two variables, supervisor leadership style, which is the independent variable, and employee efficiency, which is the dependent variable. In employee efficiency, I came across a way of calculating it in an article, which of course is cited, and it is a percent calculated by standard labor hours, which of course is 40 hours a week, divided by, divided by the amount of time actually worked, which includes overtime. And then you multiply the result by 100. So if you work 40 hours a week, of course, you're 100% efficient. But if you work more, your efficiency percentage decreases. And I thought that that was a great way to measure it, because it's not like productivity where you can say, I produced this amount of product, I'm this productive. Efficiency is more about how well can you get your work done and how efficiently, of course. So the population for this research were individuals employed working full time, but they are not leaders or supervisors themselves. Meaning they could be entry level or they could be one step above entry level, depending on how any and all organizations are structured. Just that they are not a boss to anyone. They just have a boss. So for this research, I looked, excuse me. Sorry about that. I looked into using the multi-factor questionnaire briefly. Obviously, I can't quite remember the full name, but I looked into that briefly and decided that it wasn't going to quite measure what I needed it to. So I decided I needed to create my own instrument. So I used Qualtrics, which is available through Texas State, and I created my own survey. It was just 14 questions, very quick. It took about 5 minutes, and the main things were it eliminated people if they did not work full time, so it kept my population in check. And it asked about how many hours a week do you work on average overtime, and how would you, it had the leadership styles as choices, and it was which of these most closely resembled your current supervisor. And those were my two have to answer these questions, mandatory questions. And the survey link was distributed through social media on the platform Facebook, which I'm sure everyone is very familiar with. And I got a 223 total responses. But because there was some missing data, it was actually 182 complete responses that I used for analysis. First, only 210 of the survey responses were 100% completed, which is a 94% completion rate overall. So I was very happy with that. But out of those 210 complete responses, only 182 actually met the criteria for participation, which meant they were working full time and did not leave the two mandatory questions I mentioned previously blank, or answered not incorrectly, answered nonsensically. I had some that didn't quite make sense with, I think they were probably not really interested in answering. So this was a quantitative bivariate correlation non-experimental survey research design, And I initially planned for cross-tabulation and bivariate analysis as my two analytical pieces, but in working with and discussing with my research professor, Dr. Shatay Ashford, we determined, and by her recommendation, that scatter plots would be a better tool to determine a correlation between my variables than bivariate correlation. So my results. I want to explain there was a significant difficulty in calculating efficiency. And I guess it wasn't a difficulty, it was just a bump in the road. Because I left the question open-ended, I had a lot of non-numerical, nonsensical responses. This is what I mentioned in the previous slide. Like for zero, I had so many answers, like the numerical zero, which was what I was looking for, but some people typed zero, zero. Some people put n/a, not applicable. Some people said, I don't work overtime. And so I had all these non-numerical responses that I needed to handle up on because it was good data and I wanted to use it, but I couldn't obviously if it wasn't numerical and uniform. So I of course replaced all of those with the numeric zero. And I also had some people answer with some sort of range, like between 10 and 15. And so I used the midpoint formula. So I just went straight down the middle with every single range to keep it even. So 10-15 became 12.5. So with that in mind, these are my results. So you'll see table 4 here is my cross tabulation, and it is underneath the umbrella of employees at 100% efficiency. So this is leadership style in relation to those fantastically efficient employees. So you'll see laissez-faire is the number 1 with 25 respondents at 40.98%, and transformational is in the middle at 22, 36%, and transactional is last at 14 respondents and 23%. And the scatter plot right below that is leadership style in relation to number of respondents at which percentage of efficiency. And you can see that there isn't anything groundbreaking there. They're all distributed roughly the same based on the number of respondents. If you'll remember, transactional was the smallest number of the 182 respondents. That was just 44. Passive avoidant or laissez-faire had 51 respondents out of the 182, and transformational was the largest at 87, which brings us to my first summary point. That 87 respondents is actually 47.8% of the overall respondents, so just under half. So the majority of employees perceive their supervisors as transformational leaders, and that is important for leaders to know that they're either being perceived as that or they likely are very much a transformational leader. So based on these results, which are within hairs of each other, the most efficient employees have bosses who exhibit the laissez-faire or passive avoidant leadership style. And that means that 40% of employees at 100% efficiency across all the leadership styles reported their bosses as laissez-faire. But transformational isn't far behind at just 36%, so it's sort of to be taken with a grain of salt. Each leadership style, of course, has positives and negatives based on this data. There are pros and cons to each of these styles as both the leader and the subordinate of that leader. For example, passive avoidant and laissez-faire, as we already discussed, they had the most efficiency, but they also had the least efficient person who reported working 80 hours a week, which is 0% efficiency. In transactional leaders, their respondents who reported leaders as transactional had the lowest overall number of 100% 100% efficient employees, but they reported the least amount of overtime overall out of any of the leadership styles. And transformational leaders had the highest population at 87 respondents, but only 22 of them, reported being 100% efficient. So that said, and considering all these results, let's get to the conclusion. So in this study, I was hoping to determine if one leadership style makes employees more efficient in relation to another. And while the results were not able to determine that conclusively, the results did give us great insights into these variables. For example, anyone who sees these results is probably going to be a leader employee, is one or will someday be one, or is both and will someday be both. So leaders should know that they're likely perceived as a transformational leader or likely are one. And employees should know what transformational leaders and really what all common leadership styles look like so they can best understand their boss and how to best be their best employee. That was a lot of bests. And though laissez-faire employees are the most efficient based on my results, that doesn't consider, does efficiency mean best work quality? Does efficiency mean that they are the best employees? Not necessarily. We're not sure. So that's a recommendation for a future study. What does that mean? Is efficiency what we should be striving for, or should it be quality of work? Great new study there. And another great implication is that truly each leadership style is different, which means they're different for everyone. And whether they work for one leader or one employee and one leader, who knows until you're in that situation. What works for one might not work for another. It's the common, that's a very much a cliche. But it's true in this case. So implications for the vast transformational leadership theory. Like we said, leaders making followers into leaders means setting an ideal example, which can be perfectly applied to being efficient. If your boss is super efficient, you'll likely follow suit. And more recommendations for future studies. The literature is full of different leadership styles and leadership theories, and they all should be studied in relation to employee efficiency. Maybe one is better suited than the leadership styles I used. It also might be helpful to focus on a single business or organization or industry in relation to efficiency. What does efficiency look like in a school versus an IT startup? Completely different. So that's a great a niche to do more research in. I also feel like this study indicated that there's a lot of people working a lot of overtime, perhaps more than we thought. And the question is why? That would be a great study. You know, almost 60% of the participants in my study reported that they work more than 40 hours a week on a consistent basis. So that would be really interesting to delve into that. And so in conclusion, the results were not able to determine significant evidence that one leadership style is more effective over another regarding employee efficiency. But like I said, it did give us some great insights into different pieces and parts of leadership style and employee efficiency as variables themselves. So now time to do more research. Thank you so much for watching. I apologize for any pauses or when I coughed. Feel free to rate my presentation, provide comments and or questions, please. I'm happy to answer any of them, and you can hit the dislike or like button if you'd like. Thank you so much.